Welcome back, everyone. Hopefully you had a valuable, maybe awkward, maybe fun, but ultimately new experience with Twine, and you're ready to jump back into our program. We're now going to move into our competitiveness through business model innovation panel with Marshall Van Alstine as our moderator.
Well, wonderful that you guys can join us. I want to say we have everything for you from B through Z. We've got Beloye through Zerbib, and have a fantastic set of panels for you this afternoon. So I'm going to give you a little bit introduction to some of the folks that are going to be joining us. Temba Bongo, you could hardly ask for more driven individual. Just give you a little bit of background. Some of you might have run a marathon, but Temba has actually run, I think we're showing the wrong folks. You can put me up on screen or put Temba up on screen. Temba runs the Comrades Marathon. What you might not know is that that's not the 26-mile version. That's the 55-mile version. And he's actually the Greens number holder, which means he's medaled in this at least 10 times. So if you're looking for someone who's driven in these things, that's rather extraordinary. Temba is the founder of Discovery Insure, and he's also president and board chairman of ABBLA Entrepreneur. So we'll come back to you, Temba, in just a moment. I want to introduce our other panelists also. As other power panelists here, our next one alphabetically is Emma McGigan. Computer Weekly named her among the 50 most influential UK women in information technology, and Computer Business named the top 10 most successful UK women in tech. Emma leads Accenture's Intelligent Platform Services division and works as a partner, Accenture Microsoft group, with lots of expertise covering many different platforms, including SAP, Microsoft, Oracle, Salesforce, Workday, Adobe, and numerous others. So we'll actually get her perspectives on managing these platform innovations. If that's not powerful enough, we also have Sophie Velastegui. I hope I pronounced that correctly. Thank you. Business Insider has named her the most powerful female engineer for her work in artificial intelligence and new technology. So you'll be really, I wouldn't want to arm wrestle her as the most powerful woman engineer in the marketplace. She's currently CTO for artificial intelligence for Microsoft Dynamics. So really talking with someone with deep expertise. And she's chair of the World Economic Forum Global Future Council on Emerging Technology, someone else working in this area. And then bring up the end with Zerbib. Bruno, Zerbib couldn't have a better title for this panel: Chief Platform and Technology Officer for Schneider Electric. He has decades of experience, all the way from Yahoo and Cisco, former Chief Technology Officer for Energy Management Businesses, Chief Technology Officer for Altus Group, VP HP Cloud, also Enterprise Services Group. So Bruno, welcome. Thank you for joining us. We have really quite an exceptional panel of folks with platform expertise. Start with Temba. So Temba, I understand you not only founded a couple of these businesses and done a number of interesting things in this space, but you've also been an investor in platform business. So I want to ask you kind of a pair of questions. One of these is, how is it you make decisions of what to invest in the platform business? So how do you choose a platform investment? And another one would be, since you've done some businesses like insurance, does it make sense for traditional firms to make platforms? Why or why not? When does this make sense? And how would you make these kinds of determinations? So how do you choose these investments, and when are traditional businesses suitable for platform transformation?
Thank you, Marshall. When you think about, maybe let me start with your last question. When does it become suitable to create these platforms or to allow traditional businesses to become platforms? My sense is that if you're not innovating, you're dying, given the fact that there is a high rate of new innovations coming into the market. And many people are very nimble when they come into the market because they don't have the legacy systems. So because of that very opportunistic environment where there is no legacy, and as a result, they are able to move quickly. And when they move quickly, if you are not taking a very clearly focused long-term view, you run a risk of becoming irrelevant. So I would say the right time for businesses to start thinking about, a traditional business to start thinking about platforms is right now. And of course, your seminal work with Jeff is a very good guide on how do you then make a transition into becoming a platform? Because some people think about platforms purely on the technological front, and they forget the other missing pieces in terms of collaborating effectively, such that your platform is ready to be a plug and play opportunity. So for me, that is the starting point.
I couldn't agree more. I think this idea, it's not just technology. You've got to choose partners. You've got to think strategically. It's a really important point.
Yeah, and of course, how do I look at these businesses as I start investing and as I think about opportunities of where the future is going? What drives me the most about these opportunities is to look at the mentality. So I think for me, the fundamental piece of the equation is when I meet an entrepreneur, you look at their mentality about intellectual property, you look at their mentality about the opportunities that lie ahead. Are they scanning the environment? One of the key things that I've always been worried about, no matter how successful that business is at that particular point in time, is this thing called hubris born out of success. I worry about someone who has arrived and they've gotten into a place where they think they've got it all made, because truth be told, while you are running, using the analogy of running, someone is running faster than you.
I couldn't agree more. Also, you probably, you're obviously aware of Jeff Bezos, but they always have this day one philosophy. Always someone is going to be coming up behind you. So you actually have to run really, really hard in order to stay ahead of the pack. Thank you. Excellent set of insights. Thank you for that. So let me bring Emma into the conversation. Emma, given your role at Accenture as partner to Microsoft, I just got to ask you this question, okay? Huge numbers of different firms. I'll pick an industry, whether it's automotive, we heard finance and healthcare from Pinar today, whether it's e-commerce, they're going to bump up against the giants. They're going to bump up against Google and Apple, and they're going to bump up at Facebook and Microsoft, who's your ally here. How do traditional firms compete with the giants? How would, what advice would you have for them in trying to enter these markets? And given your role at Accenture, I assume you have excellent experience and answers on how to deal with this.
Well, I think the starting point for that is those traditional organizations have to really remember what their strengths are, and they know the industry. And they know the industry because typically they've been operating in it for a really long time, and they know their customers, they know what their customers look for. The challenge that they have is how then do they do that rotation? You know, Temba just talked, you got to start now and you've got to be fast because somebody's coming up behind you. And the challenge they've got when they look across at the Microsofts and the Googles and the platform companies is the pace at which they can go. But those platform companies that were born on a platform, they can't cover every industry at the same depth. And you just look at something like healthcare. Healthcare in every country around the world has gone through this tremendous disruption over the last 18 months. And you suddenly see really unexpected players starting to talk about a healthcare opportunity. But really, and we know, right? We know that we can get a better prognosis for a serious illness by using the AI that can track all that data. But we still want the human who understands what we're going through to explain it to us. And knowing your customer the way the traditional industries do, the way those traditional operators do, that's their strengths, and they need to pool that with the partners, with the pace to help them drive that rotation into a platform company, and they can't wait. And I think that's the thing that they need to remember, is about remembering what they're good at. They're never going to be as good as a Microsoft or any of the other platform companies at managing data, but they know their industry better.
That's a great observation. I've worked with a number of platform companies, and a lot of them do think that their knowledge of their own specific industry does help give them an advantage. They've got some unique data. I think that's a great start. That's very helpful. Let's bring Sophia into the conversation. Sophia, given your role at Microsoft, I've got to ask you the same question. So let me give you two questions. So one of these, of course, is again all of these different firms trying to enter into platform business, and they're going to be competing with a Microsoft and a Facebook and a Google. So my first question is, how should they compete with you? And then let me follow up with another question, which was, so what role does artificial intelligence play in that transition? So we'll give you those two questions.
So thank you again for inviting me to speak at this prestigious event with my colleagues here. I wanted to reiterate what Emma stated about the importance of really leveraging your knowledge in the space, and that Microsoft and other platforms cannot cover it. They may cover 80% of the way, but that 20%, you can actually leverage it for higher margin because of that. Another thing to think about is, in some ways, especially core technology and the speed at which things are happening, that cannot be matched by some of the tech companies that I've stated. But platforms like Microsoft do provide those components. Why must you create everything in-house? You don't. And what you can do is use the components that Microsoft has and develop your own specific platform based on that, with the understanding of that industry. I want to give the example of virtual agent. You can do it from scratch, which means you have to have data scientists, researchers with natural language processing and natural language understanding models to be created. Or you can use something like Microsoft Power Virtual Agent that gets you 80% of the way, which is low code built software, and add your scenario and add your information to augment that further. If you want to then become further invested into the platform itself, you can take on the additional work of software development using bot framework and cognitive services as just as an example, or any other third party. It's not exclusive to just Microsoft platform, but other platforms, you can stitch it together. And it also strengthens your technology capability while going to market that much faster. And then the second question is the role of AI playing in the transition of these platforms. Is one of the things AI and other larger digital technologies are being available, and it's also lowering the barrier for entry for platform creation. AI can provide the insights by stitching the different information that you in your industry know is beneficial to get that insight for the end users and process all these large data sets that's available.
Wonderful. So how about are you making artificial intelligence tools broadly available to folks that actually don't have those things?
Yes. So there are a couple of tools such as cognitive services that provides you all of the things and tools, whether it be vision-based, hearing-based, speech-based, all of that is already available, and service that you can call based on API calls and so forth. Also, number two is, people talk about AI, but you're going to have to manage the AI solutions. And there's something called ML Ops, Machine Learning Operation and Development Framework. And AI Builder is a product that Microsoft provides that allows you to, once AI goes there and self-learning, you need boundary condition. Who's going to provide that boundary conditions? You need that ML Ops to go help you and also make improvements based on additional information you're learning from how users are using your platform.
Splendid, thanks. All right, let's bring Bruno into the conversation. So Bruno, at Schneider Electric, you've certainly been working in some of the energy markets. So I'm going to give you a pair of questions, especially as an incumbent in this space. One of these is, what kinds of platforms are you seeing in the energy space? So what's happening? What are you doing? And you're making that transition. So we heard a little bit in the panels about that today, as another aspect of that. And then as a company that's been in existence for a while, I'd also like you to address this question: are platforms suitable for all companies, or are there certain of your businesses that you're not going to transform the platform, or is everything going to transform a platform? If so, why or why not? So what are the platform business models that you're seeing in energy? And again, which of these traditional businesses are suitable for platform transformation? All of them, and which ones would you favor, and why or why not?
So I think it goes back maybe, if I were to take a step back and also reflecting on what my colleagues here have been saying, which I agree with. When you build a strategy, you always have to focus on sustainable differentiation, right? And so you have to understand the difference between your core and what's core to you, what's context. And often, you know, you look at also in a very agile environment, you have to prioritize and deliver capabilities to your customers that they really need from the get-go. When we think about energy, we've seen that space completely changing the last few years. I mean, like 5-10 years ago, I would never have thought about joining an energy company. Coming from Silicon Valley, that would have made no sense to me. And what I've seen the last few years, and that's the reason why I've joined Schneider Electric, was the fact that I believe that energy was on the verge of not being a commodity anymore. And the reason is because intelligence had to be combined with energy going forward to achieve the goals that we had. That essentially that society has defined. When you think about energy becoming more intelligent, you know, so that it can be automated, self-healing, deliver more advanced capabilities in terms of lowering the bill, things like that. But also what we're saying is that everybody will become a prosumer of some sort in the future, meaning producer and consumer of energy. And taking a step back, we have to figure out where is the inflection point where we make it so efficient that we can move the world from being where it is today to become a much more sustainable world using sustainable energy. So sustainability today is one of the key drivers for us that requires way more intelligence, way more analytics, more AI, more value being added on top of the things that we've been doing. And that's one of the big drivers that's forcing us or pushing us, motivating us to accelerate the migration towards a platform play, to make sure that we keep delivering that value.
I love this idea of energy not as a commodity. I would have thought that you know, a watt is a watt is a watt. They're all substitutable, and that you're suggesting that they're not commodities if you add intelligence along with substitutability, sustainability. I think it's a fascinating observation and really interesting adding artificial intelligence or others. I don't want to let you entirely off the hook on the second question. Are there businesses you think aren't suitable, or at least are there some you think are more suitable for platform transformation? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I would say, but it's an emerging theory, because to be very honest with everybody here on this Zoom, is we're still learning, right? So any answer that I'm giving you right now, it's an emerging answer, and that might have to be refined in the future. I would say that anytime you believe that the problem is going to require some significant amount of thinking to be solved, or a huge amount of data. So it's a big data. You have small data problems. You can actually apply AI on top of small data. But some of those problems are big data centric problems, which means they will require not just the data coming from one user at a time, but coming from many others. Obviously, you have to think about data privacy and all those things. When you start thinking that the only way to solve a problem in a significant way is by becoming more data-centric, then you have two problems to solve. First of all, create the right kind of data management platform that allows you to do that and aggregate all of that data to power a more advanced AI model. And then the other thing is you have to accept the fact that you can't solve it. You can't necessarily solve the problem entirely by yourself, and tap into the idea that you're going to team up with others. And so you need to have something that's extensible, that can evolve, that can scale, that can adapt. And for me, this is a definition of a platform.
I like that. This also picks up on something Temba said earlier about looking for partners. In that, I actually think it's a really nice observation. And data, I think, also is a good metric for where you can create network effects, which also then helps market that are more suitable for platform transformation. Temba, let's come back to you on this question. I don't know if you have any other thoughts on the questions I've posed to others so far, such as which businesses you think are more or less transformable, or whether artificial intelligence plays a role in that transformation. In your own business, you know, you might think of insurance as a fairly traditional business. Do you have any other thoughts on what makes a business suitable or unsuitable for platform transformation? Whether AI plays any role in that?
Yeah, I'll tell you the biggest contentious business, and I know a lot of people probably don't see it as a business because it's typically very bureaucratic. It's government. Many governments across the world, they struggle with this idea of using artificial intelligence. They struggle with this idea of using platforms as a mechanism. And I'll tell you the biggest barrier when you look at those issues, it's typically a matter of trust. Because it's either they are afraid of dealing with the private sector, or they are concerned about the integrity of that data being used by the private sector for whatever reason. I believe there will always be barriers, there will always be problems, but it takes a very determined spirit to say, I want to solve this problem and I'm going to look for partners, and they are not going to be perfect, but I'm willing to collaborate. Now, the biggest problem which you typically find in government services is that, I mean, I think, Emma, you would know this because Accenture does deal with government entities in different countries. You would find that they are so obsessed with the ownership element of that data set. They are so obsessed with the bureaucratic processes, and they become unsuitable as a result of that. They are not nimble. They're not sufficiently nimble. And I don't know whether it's a fault of the business community from our perspective that we always want things to move at the speed of lightning, or whether it's a question of because of profitability objectives that we have when we enter into the table of conversations. The question is, how do we bridge these gaps and these competing needs so that we become an enabler to solving big strategic problems in the government sector? So the government sector, if we can just deal away with this issue of the trust deficit, I think business and innovators, engineers, you name it, across the globe, we have a very good chance of addressing an issue at the core. COVID has been an eye-opener for me. I mean, I look at what happened in South Korea about traceability. And then I look at what happened in our country, and I look at what happened in the US and the debates about having all this data set, individuals in the private hands. And of course, you can see what's going on in China as well. However, what we do forget is that this data set can be used for a greater good. So you've got these AI capabilities that reside in the private sector. As long as we can come around the table and find that common thread where we're saying we are solving these problems, yes, it doesn't mean it's perfect, but we are willing to work together. And I think that's been the biggest barrier. And the unsuitability is driven by our issues of trust mainly, which is why government has become a difficult entity to implement these solutions in that environment.
So I'm going to have to talk to you after the panel is over about data for the greater good. I think it's a wonderful topic, and I actually want to dig into that a lot as a research area. I also find it interesting you talked about speed in government. I don't know if you heard in the earlier panel, but Kai-Fu Lee was critiquing Silicon Valley for not being fast enough. And we get a real challenge if we're talking about Silicon Valley being faster than government, and Silicon Valley isn't fast enough. So we're going to have to find interesting ways to get governments to speed up. Also, I think your point about trust is extremely important. That's how you get partners to build with you. And I think that's how you get people you don't know to give you ideas you don't have, which helps you get the innovation in your business model, which I really think makes a big.
Yeah, I just want to zoom into what Bruno said when you talk about the energy sector. As you would recall that when you came to South Africa, one of the key partners I had was an oil company, BP. And there's always been this debate to say fuel, well, we call it petrol for motorists most of the time. They'll say petrol is petrol. It doesn't matter where you buy it, whether you're buying it from BP or Shell or any other fuel retailer, it really doesn't matter. However, at the heart of it, when you start gathering that data set, when you start looking at what's happening, the behavioral patterns of the motorists, and what happens when they fill up, are they filling up a full tank? Are they filling up half? What are the motivators? You will be amazed that even in the energy sector, the granular level of analysis that comes out of your AI and your data sets, it can change that environment in a very remarkable way. It used to be said, because the motorist doesn't care where they get their fuel from, petrol is petrol. So he can, I mean, I've got a fuel station about 2 kilometers from here. but I don't fill up there because of the benefit that I had created through the reward system. I drive another 3 kilometers more to go and fill up there. And it just shows you the power of platforms. If you've created the right platform, you've created the right incentives, you're rewarding the customer, things change dramatically. So there is a definite business value to being able to take that data set and use it appropriately.
I remember you had a great example of experiments that you were using. So again, petrol is just not petrol is not petrol. You were doing something like actually combining it with, you get a free cup of coffee after a certain number of points, and that would get them to drive over to another one. Great example of hypothesis testing, expanding partners to your ecosystem, and actually getting more creative. I think it's a fantastic example. I'm going to come to a different question on the business model innovation. So I'm going to make this available to anyone, but I'll address it to the two most powerful women in the world who happen to be on the panel. So we've got a question on doing platforms. Can a platform strategy emerge from the bottom of an organization, or does it have to be led from the top? If we're going to have this interesting question, so we're looking at competition from business model innovation. Where can that business model innovation come from? Can it come from the bottom, or are we required that it's kind of the C-suite that takes the initiative on this? So we'll start with Sophia. What do you think about that?
I think the culture matters more in this state than ever before, and some of the engineering practices. So I've been fortunate to be in companies where some of those platform decision and architect was created from the bottom up. But the first order thing is, it's not a solution that only one organization will benefit from. A platform means that it can scale to different use cases and different interest points. And so that means, just like a house, if you don't have plumbing for a bathroom, it's very challenging to do it after the fact. But having some of that foresight to go architect that in the beginning, to have the extendability and make that a cultural norm, was something that's very important. And so, at least in the various companies I've worked in, also partnered with, there's a lot of startups as well, that it was something that was germinating in these engineers and these thought leadership. And it was ground level. They decided either to do it within the companies they're part of or splinter off in a startup. So I've seen it happen significantly in that environment, but the culture has to foster that. That's one thing to state. Now, if it's a scale out and there's benefit with these different pilots and you want to roll it out for a larger user base, that does require a lot more orchestration. And so hence why the top level is needed in those cases.
Let me see if we can get Accenture. And Emma, what's your take on that problem? Do you think this can come from the bottom, or do you think it has to be driven top down?
Well, I think to continue with where Sophia started, I think it needs both. So you can create within a big organization, you can create a pilot, you can nurture something, you can trial it, you can do that bottom up. But if you really have a vision that you want to create that have that reusability and that transference across the whole organization that Sophia just talked about, that has to be done sponsored and directed top down, because you're not just talking about the engineering components. Everybody keeps talking about this. It's about engaging this culture and shifting the behaviors to drive to a very different way of operating, being data driven. When you go, if you start, and there are some very well told stories of organizations who said, right, we're going to create a platform business. We are a traditional car manufacturing. We're going to have a platform business to support the future of digital mobile vehicles. And we're going to put it miles and miles and miles away from HQ. We're going to employ a whole load of new people. So the legacy organization doesn't feel like it's anything to do with them. They're not being attracted to adopt those methods. And the CEOs in those examples, they don't last very long. And I think it's really important here that when organizations think about driving this nurtured from the bottom up, which I think is really important, and it's really important from engagement and taking our entire organizations with you. But the top-led inspiration needs to be there to enable them to really be beating the drum and encouraging that this is for everybody. This isn't this select few, it's everybody. And making sure that when you start to drive that bottom-up change, you bring you bring those partnerships in to help drive that acceleration and that pace that everybody here, Temba spoke about it and Bruno, but then they also can bring some of the legacy employees with them too. So they're bringing that know-how, bringing that knowledge with them, but also showing that that conversion, that journey can happen. And I think that's what makes this really an exciting opportunity, but it is also what makes it difficult to drive that full journey to really go from strategy to adoption.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. Just a reminder to the audience, if you'd like to ask questions of any of the specific panelists on any of the things that they're saying, do go to Slido. I'll give you a chance to actually pose those about any of the different candidate topics in here. I'd now like to open it up. I'd like to have a question. I only ask everybody. I'm going to direct start with Bruno, but a really universal question. I've seen this innumerable times in consulting, and I've seen it. It came up in Jeff's remarks on measurements. It comes up in so many different companies making the platform transformation. Monetization is hard. Usually there's a huge lag between the time you make the investment and the time you can actually monetize. And if you look at Amazon or Facebook or Google, at any of them, there was a huge lag. What does a traditional firm do? How do you keep your CFO off your back when you're trying to make this platform transformation? And so you're having to make the investment, or maybe you're hiding it in infrastructure, as we heard earlier, because they don't want to report on the costs. This is a perennial problem as folks launch platforms. How do you deal with a lag? How do you solve that problem? So Bruno, we'll start with you, but I'll open it up to any of the panelists, because it's a big challenge.
You're asking a super important question, and that's the reality. I had to deal with multiple times, and it's one of the hardest problems to solve. The first thing is, when you think about economics of a platform, they materialize over time. A platform is a multi-use value proposition. So the first time you do something with a platform, it comes out, it's not cheaper. But as you start doing things, you start essentially rolling out multiple use cases, applications on top of that platform. Then the commonality, the fact that this platform supports multiple use cases, plays into the economics of the overall solution. And so it's very hard. You talk to your CFO and you say, I'm going to create something new. By the way, I'm not killing the thing that's already existing, because it's not going to replace it perfectly, and I have to deal about business continuity. The way you deal with that contradiction, first of all, you need to have smart CFOs. You need to explain the business cases. So it's about people and culture, back to the point that was made by Sophia earlier. But I think at the end of the day, one of the things we need to talk about is agile and the culture of agile. One of the things we've learned at Schneider is really embracing this culture. You need to have ongoing validation from your customers that what you're doing makes sense. And so what you need to do, Marshall, is to avoid what we call the tunnel effect, where you tell people it's a 3-year thing. In 3 years, I promise you're going to be very happy. So you have to figure out how to build the minimum viable amount of platforming that can support the first use case you need to make the point that there's value at the end of the very short tunnel. That's really the magic here, which means you need to have a long-term architectural view to understand what's your vision with the platform, at the same time being extremely agile and trying to bring value as quickly as possible.
So starting with that minimum viable platform is completely consistent with Kai-Fu Lee's view of starting with that really powerful app, starting with something that's really solving a problem. So that's an interesting, it's nice to hear reinforcement of this, same logic. So I'd like to hear other answers to that same question. Either, Microsoft or Accenture, how are they going to afford you for a while if they're not getting revenues for a while? So how would that actually work? How can you keep your CFO off your back during that lag?
So maybe if I jump in, what I would say is it's all about the partnerships. It's not about an organization making this transition on their own. Right at the beginning, Marshall, you asked me about how do traditional organizations compete with those big platform companies like the Microsoft, like Google. And what I would say is actually it's about helping them accelerate your journey and be part of your journey. And don't think about consuming their services in a traditional supplier model. Don't think about consuming Accenture's services or other service providers in a traditional way, but push for true partnership. partnership is not about a supplier model where it's, this much money for this much pay or this much compute. It's about thinking really differently about shared outcomes where everybody can benefit. That really isn't just, and it's not just a risk reward around delivery, but it's like, if you look at just the simple view of of the way cloud-based services, it's all based on an as a service model. Well, why don't we push everything to an as a service? But organizations have to potentially give away a little bit of control. They have to really think about, what does that partnership mean? What's the outcome that would be value to me as the traditional business that I can then take to a Microsoft or a Google or to an Accenture or to any of our competitors? And then how do I bring that ecosystem together? So it's not just about a single tech partner or a single services, but how do I bring that model together? And I think these things don't have to be difficult, because we have an anchor around consume services, that as a service model, but we have to think differently about what that means.
So, and I'm going to jump in. We've got an audience question for you. It's a really wonderful one. Since Accenture is participating across so many different businesses, which are they entering as platforms out of fear versus opportunity? Which of those do you think are better options?
Well, see, I'm a bit of an optimist. I like to think everybody does it for opportunity. And, Temba has thrown down this whole discussion point here around government as a platform. I think the out of fear is the wrong question. I think organizations need to move now, because if they're not moving now, their competitors will be. So you can make that first step out of fear, or you can make it out of opportunity. But if you don't rotate into thinking about the opportunity, then you can't start to unlock cost savings that come with moving to a platform when you get, as you get there. You need to have help to be agile, to get those super use cases that Bruno talked, that minimum viable platform to start you unlocking value quicker. And you need to think about that value that you're unlocking for your consumer, whether you're B2C or B2B or government, that's going to unlock that value, that service that you couldn't provide before. And I think that's how you have to look at this.
That's great. Thank you.
Temba, to add to what Emma stated,
sure.
As well as Temba, is that whether it's fear or opportunity, the fact that you're engaging is the part that's important. Otherwise, what happens is there will be a point of the node where there is no way to translate the legacy or the other firms in traditional way to the way the modern technology stack is going. And it's becomes, the barrier to entry becomes that much higher. But if you're actually engaged, even if it's little at a time, you at least understand, and then your presence and your voice is being heard. So then the technologies can also have solutions for you. So I think that's the engagement is the most important part.
You're really on target. These markets become highly concentrated, and if you wait, you're going to have a problem. So I think you're completely correct. You really do need to engage. Temba, we have a question from the audience for you about where are the biggest platform opportunities in South Africa? So they're probably a crowded space in the United States and a crowded space in China already. So there's a two-part question. So where do you see the platform opportunities in South Africa? And are you seeing entry by the American or by the Chinese firms, and what's happening?
Thank you, Marshall. Before I answer the question, I just want to introduce a very interesting concept. While you talk about the minimum viable platform, the entity that I'm engaging with in terms of an acquisition, they talk about the minimum lovable platform. It's just a shift in the way that they engage with the platforms to say, if I can deliver a minimum lovable, then I've got customers for a long term, instead of only looking at the viability in terms of the monetary value. So it's just an introduction to an idea that when I thought about it carefully, I sit and chair a number of boards. Each time a CFO and a CIO have an argument in a boardroom, it's typically a question of the financial impact. And it's very rare that they come to us talking about, this is what the consumer is going to love, and it will therefore pay for itself, because if people love the idea of what you've delivered, they will pay for it. They will buy that solution. So it's just a slight introduction of a new concept there, which I wish a lot of boardroom conversations would revolve around. Do we love this product? And if we love this product and the customer loves this product, we know it will pay for itself. Coming back to your question.
Let me interject for one second. You're hidden in your idea, which is incredibly powerful, is also, if you have a minimum lovable product, you're going to get higher engagement and you're going to get a higher net promoter score. So that's a really powerful idea. So I wanted to emphasize that. It was a really good insight. Please pick up on the opportunities in South Africa and what's happening between Chinese and American firms entering the space.
So starting off with who is playing a big role on platforms in South Africa. In terms of industry, it's telecoms and banking and financial services are the ones that are driving platform engagement in the bigger scheme of things in this country. Give you an example, there are banks that never have any branches that have been launched in this country because they're riding on platforms. So there are partnerships. If you want to go and withdraw cash, you go and withdraw with another bank which has got the network of ATMs. So they know that they are not going to spend money on any branch network. They're not going to spend money on any ATMs. It's a very classic example of what happens with collaboration. And then when you start thinking about who is playing the biggest role, when you talk about Amazon, talking about Microsoft, talking about American entities, yes, it's true that on retail side, you've got Amazon playing quite a bit of a role in this country. But we do have our own takealot.com as an example, which started off as Kalahari.net. They've become a huge online retailer in the country. And if you look at the work they've done, the holding company being Naspers, they've invested many years ago at Tencent, before Tencent became this huge entity. So as a result, they've made so much money and they become one of the biggest heavyweights in the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, because they identified platforms way before it became in the public domain. So who is actually investing where? You find that South African companies are investing offshore. They identify these opportunities. I mean, think about Naspers. Naspers has got its roots in being a newspaper, magazines company for many, many years. But they've changed and they've become a technology business. They still have newspapers. They own what you guys call cable television networks in this country. But the biggest breakthroughs that they've made was through investing in platforms. And yet you've got Chinese also coming to invest. But I think the market has been cornered mainly by the South African companies because they tend to be a little bit more risky in their strategy. They take risks, a lot of risks. And when you've got international companies, as much as they've got dollars and euros, they tend to be a bit risk averse. And it's a function of understanding your environment. And then when you look at the rest of the continent, what you, in my current role, where I'm observing opportunities and looking for opportunities throughout the African continent, what I'm seeing is a lot of European investors. They're circling around Central Africa, Eastern Africa, looking for these opportunities to invest in platforms. What is missing in that equation is that they are doing it from Europe. They're not doing it from the continent. So they hear about ideas, but they don't see its application, as opposed to someone in South Africa who sees those opportunities and they go and take advantage and understand the environment. And the legislative environment is more complex because it's not one legislation for the entire continent. It's different countries throughout the continent.
So I think we have 1 minute left. So I don't know, if I had one question, I was going to throw it over to anyone that might have any answer. If you're changing your business model, and this could be for anyone, how do you know it's not just better than the old model? How do you know it's better than your competitor? So does anyone have a good, quick answer to that question? So if you're changing,
well, in my experience, it's been, if you're changing a business model, make sure that you are not killing the golden goose. It's as simple as that. do not kill the golden goose. Make sure that you keep your cash cow while you're introducing a new business model.
Okay, all right. Well, I think we're at time. So I want to thank everyone for that. It's a really wide variety of elements. And it's really nice to see how much this connects to several of the other things that we've heard in terms of the minimum viable product. I love this idea of the minimum lovable product and also platform. And then also some of the changes we're going to need to make in the traditional business models, and not doing it out of fear, but doing it out of opportunity, knowing we do need to move quickly. There's some really wonderful things we do need to take account of. And also artificial intelligence is enabling technology to make this more easy and straightforward. So with that, I think we're turning it over to our next event. Thank you for joining us.